So here in chapter 2, you're learning how to write very basic queries. Select statement. I go into how the syntax is structured. Very basic select star, your first query. But what I want to show you is how to use this book in tandem with the website. So I'm going to skip ahead. So you've got, I'm skipping here, you've got order by clause, you've got inline calculations, you've got this section on rounding. And so I'm going to focus on this query right here. So at this point, you've learned how to select specific fields and how to do an inline calculation. And now we're putting that calculation inside the round function. So I explain in this section what the round function does. We're giving it an alias of price, and it shows the output here. So if you were reading the book, this is all you would get, right? You'd get to read the explanation, you'd get to read the query, and you'd get to see an example output. But I'm going to switch over to the computer now and show you how, with my companion website, which actually has a version of this farmer's market database built into it, you can actually try these queries out yourself. So let's switch over there. Okay, so here I'm on my website. I've zoomed in so it can be more readable. There's a few different ways to get to the SQL editor I'm going to show you. There's a button right here to get directly to a SQL editor. But if you go in the menu, there's one at the top and one at the bottom on this page. Just go straight to Chapter SQL. That's what we're trying to get. So we were looking at Chapter 2. This takes you directly to Chapter 2. There's also Chapters 3 and 4 in here already. I'm going to add more, probably even starting today. So as soon as I post this, you'll probably start to see more chapters showing up. But the idea here is that you can actually run the queries from the book. So the SQL in the book is MySQL format. So it's made for querying MySQL databases. If you want to use the exact SQL that's in the book, you're going to have to download and install MySQL. So that one, you go to the publisher's website, which I'll pull up here. So you just go to wiley.com and you look at my book, SQL for Data Scientist, or just use the link I just showed you. And you go to downloads, and that takes you down here. You can download a zip file that includes instructions for installing MySQL as well as the companion database for the book. Now, one heads up, when I wrote the book, I had to turn in one chapter at a time, and at the beginning, I only had enough data entered to demonstrate the things in that chapter. So by the time I finished the book, there's a lot more data. So when I took the screenshots for chapter 2, and I just looked, I turned that in back in June 2020. So there was only enough database to demonstrate chapter 2. So just a heads up, if you download and install this database and run the queries from the book, they'll run. You'll just get slightly different output because there's different data that has been inserted as I wrote the other chapters and added data in order to demonstrate the other concepts. So don't be nervous if you run something and you get a different result or a result that looks different than the screenshots in the book, because the screenshots in the book are old. It should have the same columns, but it might have different data. So switching back, if you don't want to download and install MySQL, you can actually run the queries right here in the website. The difference is that the website uses SQLite. So it's actually a database that's right here in the browser. It's loaded with the web page. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you see the interactive SQL editor, and you can execute that SQL, and it shows you the results right here. So this is select everything from the customer table, order by customer last name. So you could see that's the result. The difference is that there's slightly different syntax in some cases. So what I'm doing is I'm translating the queries from the book into SQLite syntax. Most of them are going to be the same. So for this chapter, these 4 queries were exactly the same between MySQL and SQLite. This last query, the MySQL concatenation function, is different in SQLite. They actually use these 2 pipes to concatenate the strings. So don't worry about it. Don't get nervous. I think it's actually a good thing that you can learn how to apply the same concepts in multiple flavors of SQL, if you want to call it that. And I will indicate where it's different from the book. So just wanted to give you a heads up so you don't get nervous. If you see something on the website that looks different from the book, it's the same concepts, just slightly different syntax. So I will point that out when that's the case. So in the book, we were looking at this query, select market date customer ID, vendor ID, and round the sale price to 2 characters after the decimal and give it the alias of price. And I'm limiting it to 10 rows of output here so we don't get the entire customer purchases table. So I'm just copying that. I'm going to paste it down here and execute it. So you see you've got the columns you asked for, it's got the alias you asked for, it's rounding to 2 numbers after the decimal like we specified. So here's where it gets fun. You can play around with it. You can say, well, what would happen if I removed the customer ID? There it goes, it's gone. So what would happen if I changed the rounding parameter? Well, now there's 3 numbers after the decimal when available. So if there's a 0, it's not showing it. I also pointed out in one of the tips in the book that you could put a negative number here. So this is not shown in the book. What does that do? It rounds to digits to the left of the decimal point. So here we're rounding to the nearest 1. So point being, you can play around with it. You can say what happens if you remove the limit. Now you're going to get a whole bunch of rows. So this is meant to be interactive and a companion for the book so that you can practice the things you're learning in the book, and you can practice it in a slightly different database syntax if you want to try SQLite. And again, if you want to try MySQL, just go to the publisher's website, download the Mysql Database. You're going to have to install MySQL. It tells you how to load the database in, and then you can write the queries exactly the way they are in the book. But hopefully this website is handy. It also should work on mobile, though it might be a little harder to scroll through the output here. But yeah, just wanted to give you a heads up that that's available and something that I consider a feature of the book that you're getting when you buy it.